museum. It's a storage of artifacts with a sacred essence. Museums always have a special atmosphere. In such places, you feel somewhat out of the real world, as if you were in another realm. It is no coincidence that news outlets from all over the world report from time to time that ghosts have been in museums. Exhibits have changed the aura in the funds, and the guards have felt the presence of something supernatural and heard someone's steps in the silence of the night. And what secrets does the oldest museum of Kazakhstan keep? How to appease the spirits of the museum. When we Kazakh ask for help from our forefathers, we always need dough. Bake 7 flatbreads called жетінан, give them as a sacrifice. The second life of museum artifacts. Our whole life consists of living and non-living things. Every day we use non-living objects, objects created by people of past centuries. Hidden passages and secret rooms. For any large institutions, including public ones, a system of underground structures and communications is provided. This was relevant in the Soviet period. They had to serve as shelter during a war. Hey guys, I'm Daniel Besedin, professor of sociology from Australia. Now I enjoy learning the history of Kazakhstan, and of course I couldn't miss visiting the Central State Museum, the biggest and the oldest museum in the country. Now, people say that every museum with its collections and artifacts is full of mysteries, riddles, secret passages, maybe even ghosts. This is Searching for Mystery. Let's find out if this place ticks all the boxes. When you get in here, you want to stay up and anticipate some sort of miracle. After all, some exhibits stored here are thousands of years old. This is a tangible material heritage of bygone eras with its legends, secrets, and mysteries. Olga Makisheva, who has worked here for nearly 1.5 decades, knows this very well. She's a senior researcher of archaeology department at Central State Museum of Kazakhstan.
By
and large, of course, we are all people and we are no strangers to anything, including belief in some mystical things. I've been working here for so long that I'm part of this mysticism, probably. When I entered the vault and I need to find some item quickly, as I'm figuring out what exactly I need, these, to say spirits, they get in touch with me and they give me what I need. I mean, I have the feeling that I've come so close to these exhibits that they come into my hands on their own. Artifacts of ancient, relatively recent, and even modern history are stored in the funds of a state museum. Ethnographic and paleontological exhibits, number relics, manuscripts, and a rich archaeological collection. There are more than 30,000 storage units in our archaeology fund. All these items belong to different chronological periods, starting from the Stone Age to the Paleolithic, Neolithic, and Neolithic eras. Speaking in numbers, they date from 140,000 years ago and up to the 15th century AD. In other words, the timeline is quite large. The museum is also a mysterious place because each exhibit has its own story. Any clay shard, piece of clothing or jewelry and household item once belonged to its owners. What kinds of people were they? What did they do? And what thoughts did they have? We can only guess. But all these things bear the imprint of lives and times. Many of them were excavated from ancient burials. Those facts can awaken the fear in an outside person. However, museum workers are seasoned people. They have a different view on this type of things. Here is what Галия Темиртон, Deputy Director for Scientific and Research Work, says. You know, my first impression of the museum didn't have anything to do with dead objects. I didn't view it that way. There was an expression sometimes they used to say that the museum is dead silent. This phrase is still in use sometimes. But in my head, it was never related to some archaeological materials or bone remains or representatives of the wildlife and stuffed animals that are in our collections. Our whole life consists of living and non-living things. Every day, we use objects created by people of past centuries. And we value them as artifacts, as things that keep memory of your relatives, of your people, of your country, of other people, of other cultures. Therefore, when you perceive them as your history, your past, or the history of your country, then this feeling actually coexists with you pretty well. And it even promotes your interest, and namely scientific interest, in studies and explorations. Not too many people know, but one of the most studied, rare, and yet mysterious exhibits of this museum is not the golden human as I thought. This is a bronze censer, experts attributed to the 5th or 3rd centuries BC. This sacred object of the early Iron Age was found in the village of Yermensai in the foothills of Almaty by a local resident. He was digging a vault in his yard and found human bones at a depth of about 2 meters. Right above the skull, there was an overturned bronze censer. This censer was found by accident and given to our museum. And since that time, since 1993, the censer has been our centerpiece of the exposition. It's a great example of ancient culture of the Sacs and their mythology. This censer is a ball with 16 snow leopards depicted along its edge. At its center, there's a sacrificial argally surrounded by 2 wolves and 2 ravens. Each figurine in the composition of the censer of Yermensai has its own specific place, which is non-coincidental. Scientists who have studied it claim that it depicts ancient ritual involving a herbivore animal, a mountain sheep in this case, sacrifice to the spirits of ancestors or the tribal god. And wolves and crows act as intermediary animals. As suggested by archaeologists, this artifact was found in a place dedicated to rituals. It may seem shocking, but the woman whose remains were found next to this censer could have been sacrificed. Some of the museum employees also work as research fellows at the Kazakhstan Institute of Archaeology. These are Gulnara Jumabekova and employees of the archaeology department, including myself. We participated in the excavations of the very site where the censer was found. It was a cult place for some rituals among the Saka tribes. So we excavated a patch of land where the remains of this woman were found. Maybe she was a priestess or something like that, and at the head of her grave we found this censer. Few people think about it, but the modern Kazakh town of Issyk, which is located not far from Almaty, has a reference to an important and even scary role that this region played in ancient times. The place name Issyk sounds very similar to Yesik, which means door in Kazakh. The world-famous golden human was excavated here, as well as bronze censer of Yermensai. But what was this door, and most importantly, where did it lead to? A lot of burial mounds, as well as finds of ancient ritual objects around Almaty, make us think that this was a door to the other side, to the world of the dead. And all objects somehow linked to the rituals of the transition from life to death are decorated with funerary symbols. Some highly sensitive individuals are sure that these artifacts store powerful energy. They also consider it dangerous to try to use such objects for private purposes. Mainstream science does not recognize such speculations and doesn't comment on them. However, certain events actually make you think whether it's just a speculation.
Это было, наверное, в 2000 году.
It was, as far as I remember, in 2000. All sorts of mystical incidents happened with the sensor that was found on the territory of Almaty. There's some objects, especially the cult items of Saka people, that cannot be used for selfish interests. If a person uses them, then this person is likely to get punished by higher powers. Take, for example, the owner of that house. Initially, he did a good thing by giving his find to our museum. And then his family members, they started asking us for compensation, redress or whatever. As soon as a new director was appointed, they came to ask for their share. Eventually, we were told there was a fire in his garden. Another mysterious incident happened to the Saka sensor. Once it was decided to bring it out to Italy for an exhibition. Now, as Olga Makisheva says, some strange things happened there. When this case was already closed, the customs seal came off it somehow. Everybody was very concerned about that because we didn't know how we would get it across the border. But the customs officers attached it somehow. When we boarded the plane, there were a couple of problems with the plane. It didn't take off the first time. Well, our employers jokingly said it had something to do with this sensor. It didn't want to leave for Italy. Honestly, I don't believe in ghosts or supernatural things, but these stories give me goosebumps. As it turns out, history is intertwined with mysticism in this place. Here is what one of the curators told us. It's hard to believe, but Marjan Shunusova, head of storage of funds department, says that spirits, called arwahs, often test the keepers. This is what happened to her. We say that everything, for example, even gold, likes to hide here. Yes, we can say that it does it all the time. There was a curious case when the previous custodian was handing me over our funds of precious metals. A very strange incident occurred, I must say. We had to count coins in our collection several times, because each time, for one reason or another, a totally different number came up. The coins just didn't add up. But no matter how much the custodians counted the gold, nothing worked. And I want you to understand that it wasn't just negligence. Custodians are financially responsible for every valuable exhibit entrusted to them. Of course, the women were really concerned about it, so they decided to perform some sort of ritual to appeal to the higher powers and spirits of the ancestors. For example, when we Kazakhs ask for help from our forefathers, we always need to bake 7 flatbreads called zhetinan and give them as a sacrifice. For the most part, the number 7 is sacred to our people. Well, we baked these flatbreads, read a certain surah from the Holy Quran, and gave the flatbreads to the closest and dearest people in our museum. Imagine when sacred breads were eaten and spirits had time to think, they eventually managed to count all the coins. All otherworldly forces that rage in one room or another, well, they calmed down a little and came to some kind of consensus. Well, surely you know, maybe it was a little bit too superstitious, maybe it's not that relevant for our modern society, but we have performed some ritual actions, and in the end, after the recalculation, the number of coins agreed with what was registered in the official documents. Usually, people think that museum employees' job is no sweat. Just sit, keep order in the halls, and give tours from time to time. In fact, they have intensive scientific work going on here all the time. For example, employees of the Central Museum regularly participate in archaeological excavations. Well, as for the latest finds, our archaeological expedition of the Central State Museum is headed by Alexander Nikolaevich Podushkin, who is a doctor of historical sciences. He conducts excavations at the settlement of Kultobe. There, he discovered unique things, clay tablets with inscriptions. Indeed, it is one of the findings which highlights the fact in the territory of Kazakhstan, at the turn of the 2nd century BC, people could write and even describe the events on the tablets that were attached to the walls of the Kultobe palace. In recent years, Alexander Nikolaevich was lucky. Previously, there were only fragments of tablets, only small pieces where you can read single sentences or words or letters. But there, we found a couple of bricks with large text. And at the present time, Nicholas Sims Williams, a linguist from the United Kingdom, is working on deciphering this script. Knowledgeable people claim that the museum building is full of secrets and mysteries. They say that it has secret underground structures, mysterious passages and rooms. How much is this true and to what extent? We address this question to Yermek Jasabayev, senior researcher of anthropology and ethnology department. For any large institutions, including public ones, a system of underground structures and communications is provided. This was relevant in the Soviet period. They had to serve as a shelter during a war or, consequently, natural disasters, such as earthquakes. When we do a civil defense briefing in this building for new employees, engineers explain to us the general structure of the building, its volume and its area, what capabilities it has, and show us some rooms in the basement, yes. We are to go down there in case of some natural disasters or during the bombing. As for secret corridors, I have not seen them, although there actually are some rumors about them. Now, the official website of the museum states that this building was built in 1985 by the design of the following architects: Ratushny, Mustafina, and Rzagaliev. It's rightfully considered one of the best architectural works in the entire Central Asia. The total area of the museum is more than 20,000 square meters, and the exhibition part is 7,000 square meters. Not many people know this, but the construction of the museum, from the announcement and the sketches to the official opening, took up to 14 years. Several specialists were simultaneously involved in the project. They proposed both a futuristic building full of Oriental motifs and a design consistent with Central Asian traditions. Consequently, this monumental building was constructed. At the center of the museum, there's a spacious main hall with a dome of 39 meters. From the inside, the dome is supported by a system of steel arches, and its surface decoration is inspired by Islamic architecture. The museum exhibition was opened to visitors on February 4th, 1986. Well, I'm responsible for our second hall. It is a hall of Kazakh traditional culture, and there is mostly ethnographical material covering life and traditions of Kazakh people. It displays clothes, utensils, and iron agricultural tools that were used by the Kazakhs in the past. We got these exhibits at different times. There are also many amazing exhibits here. For example, this fur coat made of swan's down has an interesting story. Since ancient times, it is forbidden to shoot white swans in Kazakhstan because the bird here is sacred. For Turkic people, it's a totem, along with a wolf or a snow leopard. According to some myth, white swan was a progenitor of Kipchak tribes, and that is symbolically reflected in the curves of Kazakh-owned dombra. Obviously, shooting the bird and making a clothes out of it was an unthinkable act. One of really interesting and unique artifacts of our museum is a swan coat, the so-called aku shige. This is a coat stitched with swan's down from the inside. We're often asked why swan's down. In our Kazakh tradition, aku, which is a swan, is a holy bird that cannot be killed. Yes, this is true. But I must stress that this coat is made of swan down, not of feathers or bird skin. It belonged to the sister of the great scientist Shohan Walihanof. Her name was Tajibai Chingiz Kızı Walihanowa. This is a really unique exhibit that doesn't have any analogues. We know that representatives of Shokan Walihanov's family brought this garment from the Akmala region and donated it to the museum. Rumor has it that the sister of the famous scientist danced at the ball in that coat with the Russian Emperor Nicholas I. But this is just a legend. Museum workers still cannot answer another question. How could an unknown master make a garment out of something so unique? We can only guess for now. We may assume that in those days the swan's down could have been purchased in some bazaars. But the 19th century contacts with the Russians had already been established. There were already an exchange of goods, so the doll could have been bought. It is quite possible to collect swan's down near nesting sites or near some lakes. Well, you know our blue lakes in northern Kazakhstan. By the way, the estate of the Walihanov's family was situated in the territory of the modern city of Kokshetau. Another rare exhibit is a beautiful dombra of a very fine work, inlaid with bone. Its gentle sounds are similar to a female voice. Once it belonged to Dilda, the wife of the famous Kazakh poet, educator and thinker Abay Kunanbay Ule. This dombra is also very interesting because, as you know, Dilda, Abay's wife, is also a character of Mukhtar Awezov's epic biographical novel, The Path of Abay. This novel describes their childhood, how they got married, and their fate. The fact is that this dombra was gifted to our museum by the descendants of Abay Kunanbay Ule. It has been kept in our museum for many years, of course. I'd like to point out that the many museum exhibitions are directly related to people's history and their culture. And often we learn legends as well as reliable information about certain exhibits from people who give us these objects. Witnesses who saw these objects or descendants of those who owned one or another of today's museum exhibits. This museum was founded in 1901, and Vladimir Yefimovich Netsvetsky was the head and curator of this museum. He was a public figure, the secretary of the Statistical Commission of the Смотрите region. He actively replenished the funds of the museum. Actually, under his management, the museum was housed in buildings, but on some days it was open to visitors.
Another really interesting fact. For many years, the museum was housed within the prayerful walls of the Ascension Cathedral. It was in the 1930s. In Soviet times, church buildings were often given to cultural establishments. In those years, the famous writer Yuri Dombrovsky worked in this museum. He described this job in his novels The Faculty of Useless Knowledge and The Keeper of Antiquities.
I'm financially responsible for those very items that were supervised by Yuri Dombrovsky. I also work with the head of our department, Nabira Trizhanova, so we can be ranked as those custodians of antiquities which were described by Yuri Dombrovsky. This talented author's works were based on the story of the discovery of the golden diadem of Kargali near Almaty. This diadem later became one of the symbols of modern Kazakhstan. Today it is kept in the museum. However, to be fair, it should be said that Dombrovsky didn't know exactly where this antique jewelry was found, since the location of the place of the legendary treasure had been lost as the repressions and the Great Patriotic War that began not long afterwards destroyed remaining traces.
For many years, local enthusiasts have been looking for the place of the buried treasure, which shed light on the diadem of Kargali. They looked through documents in the archives, asked a few surviving living witnesses, residents of Fabrichny village. They examined almost every inch of Kargali gorge and even took pictures of the cave where they thought the gold was hidden. But it was the wrong cave.
80 years later, there has been a new sensational development of the story. The cave was finally found. New gold artifacts, identical to those that had been kept in the museum for 8 decades, were added to the collections of the Central State Museum following the re-excavation carried out by the archaeologists. We used to think that this find, which arrived at our museum in 1939, was accidental. And now it has been proven with certainty that this is not an accidental discovery, but a burial site of the Wusun era. One of the participants in the study was Alexander Goryachev, a renowned archaeologist. On the same site, they found 10 more similar plaques. They were all given to our museum collection this year. The Central State Museum of the Republic of Kazakhstan, founded back in the 1830s, born out of merging small collections, not only preserved history but became the history itself by acquiring new artifacts, moving from one location to another and living through a lot with the entire country.
These were definitely some fascinating stories that I've heard from the staff of this museum today. And this is just a small part of its treasures. As for the ghosts or spirits, you know what? I didn't hear or see any. Maybe the ghosts of this place don't really want to talk to me since I'm a convinced skeptic. But I think you should try it for yourself.
Come in and find out. It was Daniel Besedin, searching for mystery. I'll see you next time.